to Mao. 2 balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. This is way back. Welcome up, Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Matt Moreno. Matt, as we record this on Monday, 4 sleeps until Dodgers opening day. Yes, Major League Baseball starts one day earlier, but are we getting excited? Are we getting the butterflies now?
Definitely excited and looking forward to the start of the season. It's weird this year because the Dodgers, like you said, are a day later than everybody else, which isn't typically the case. So it'll be kind of bittersweet to see everybody else, playing a day before them. Yeah,
absolutely bizarre. And obviously, just because of the way the schedule, when they postponed some games, the Dodgers had a scheduled off day for Thursday. I was surprised they couldn't find a way to make that work, but I think it might have had to do with home and away stuff. And anyways, they're off Thursday. The Dodgers opening day on Friday. We got a big show for you today as we look forward. This is kind of our season preview. So we're going to talk in just a moment about the thing that everybody, I think, wants to talk about, which is Cody Bellinger. Where are we at on Bellinger? Are we optimistic? Are we pessimistic? So we'll get to that. We'll talk about the opening day roster. We had hoped that for a Monday show, 4 or 5 days before opening day, there'd be a little bit more mystery, but expanded rosters has made it so we pretty much know who the offensive players will be. There is some questions to talk about on the pitching side, so we'll get to that. We'll talk spring reflections. You're a guy that is as plugged in and watching as much spring training baseball, I think, as anybody. So we'll hear from you on guys that have stood out, guys that you're concerned about. And lastly, we put out a call on Twitter for some mailbag questions. We got some great ones, so we will get to that. But let's start with Cody Bellinger and kind of the question that everybody is asking. Cody Bellinger was very bad last year. People had hoped, well, now he played better in the postseason. The shoulder's a year away from surgery, feeling better. He's going to come in. He has been terrible this spring. 30 at-bats, just 4 hits, all of them singles. 18 strikeouts, 1 walk. He's hitting 133 with a 161 on-base percentage and a 133 slugging percentage. Again, this coming off of last year where he hit 165 with a 240 on base, a 302 slugging percentage. That was in 350 at-bats. He put up a weighted runs created plus of 48. 100 is league average. He was 48. That was the second worst mark in all of baseball among players with at least 350 at-bats. StatCast last year, he was in the bottom 5% of the league in expected weighted on-base average, expected batting average. He was in the bottom 20% in hard hit percentage, expected slugging, strikeout percentage, and whiff rate. And he was not in the top 50% of any metric as far as offensive statistics go. So the question for you, Matt, is we know he's been terrible this spring, 18 strikeouts and 30 at-bats, no extra base hits. We know he was terrible last year. Do you have any sort of optimism that when the lights come on Friday, he's going to flip a switch and everything's going to be better?
No, I don't think it's going to be that quick. I mean, I'm more pessimistic than I was, last year when we were doing these shows and I would come on. I said I think in the postseason, like, he will make an impact. Like, I understand he's struggling at the plate, but I think he will kind of figure something out. And I anticipated that being more defensively, where, I think we saw in the NLDS he had, and then in the NLCS he had the home run against the Giants. He had the big base hit. But, seeing him in spring, I still go back to, for me, it's obviously, there are multiple ways you can go about it, right? I think his swing and his batting stance and the mechanics and all that, like, that is certainly a component. I still personally believe, though, that the bigger issue, I think it's just mentally for him. Because we've seen his batting stance has kind of been similar to what he had in prior seasons when he was hitting well, even last year in October when he kind of did turn it around. And he's brought some of that back, but it's not translated to results yet. And I'm not even talking, spring training, and we'll get into this with a few other players. We don't need to see them hit 300 in spring training with, 5 home runs. If they do, sure, that's great. But, you take it with a grain of salt either way.
Yeah.
The biggest concern with Bellinger for me, I think, are the strikeouts. Again, like, he's back to a situation where he's not really even putting the ball in play and giving himself a chance.
Yeah.
So as those continue to mount, I think everybody's human and it's natural for it to kind of wear on him mentally. He at least has said, kind of jokingly, like, I'm getting them out of the way now. I feel better than it shows. And so you hope that that's the case. Dave Roberts said recently he thinks Bellinger found kind of a batting stance and a setup that just needs to now stick and get repetitions with. The hitting coaches spoke with media out at Camelback Ranch and said, they're working with him on letting him kind of trying to find himself. And, he's got a new body now with his shoulder and just being older than he was in the past. So it's a complex issue, unfortunately. But for me, like, a lot of it boils down to mentally.
Yeah, for me, there's a couple things. And one is, I see people saying, hey, it's just spring training. The issue is we saw an entire season last year where he was terrible. Like, we're not talking about a small sample size. We're talking about 350 at-bats last season where he was, again, the second worst hitter in all of baseball among guys who had that many at-bats. So to see him come in this year and he's still tweaking the swing and he's tweaking the stance and he's tweaking the bat angle and he's still striking out 18 times in 30 at-bats, all of that's horrifying to me. The people that want to be optimistic about Cody Bellinger, I just don't know where you get it from. I mean, I was even looking, I know his career has been a bit of a roller coaster. If you just look at his batting averages, he had 267 as a rookie, then 260, then up to 305, then down to 239, and then last year, like I said, down to 165. But even that year when he hit 239, he was still, his weighted runs created plus was 113. He was still 15% above league average as a hitter, on top of being an elite defensive center fielder. Now we are talking about a guy who's one of the worst hitters in baseball over the last season. Again, he turned it on a little bit in the postseason and then has been bad again this spring training. You mentioned the coaching stuff, and I'll be honest, when I read Fabian Ardaya's article in The Athletic, those quotes from the hitting staff terrified me about Cody Bellinger, because you want to talk about a guy who's sort of in his head. I mean, listen to these quotes. This was from Brant Brown. Bellinger operates fast, and we want to support him. He's always looking at himself in the mirror. It's just navigating through the process and trying to be more in tune with what the real is versus the feel. We have seen some progress. Okay, what the real is versus the feel. To me, when I read these quotes, what I hear is a guy in Cody Bellinger who's actually, and I don't want to overstate this, and I'm not trying to be inflammatory, he doesn't sound coachable. I mean, like, the track record seems to be a guy who has his own ideas of what he wants to do. And when I read a quote that talks about the real versus the feel, it's kind of like, we're telling him what's working and we're telling him what would work, but he's going off of what feels good and doesn't feel good. Here's a quote from Robert Von Skoyak along the same lines. With some of that, if he wants to experiment, he's his own person. If he comes up with a thought, he has a right to try that. It's his swing, his career, and we've got to be there to help and support him, even if you don't necessarily think that's the right thing at the moment. It's his swing, and he drives that. I mean, am I missing something? Like, to me, this guy is so broken, and by all accounts, he has two guys who are experts at hitting, who have turned around career after career through the drive line process, and I'm reading this and hearing Bellinger is not listening to us. Am I missing something there?
I don't know if I would go to that extent. I think, had Bellinger been opposed to any sort of coaching or input, I think stuff like that would have probably surfaced by now, and there hasn't been. Like, I think there's been the opposite of, he is open to feedback. I think what I personally took of it, and obviously it's hard to kind of, going based off of print as opposed to maybe being there and kind of seeing body language or tone. But what struck me as kind of curious was the feel versus real.
Yeah.
Only because Bellinger, days before that, had said, I feel better than it looks. So then are the coaches now saying, well, his feelings are a little bit misleading right now with, maybe where his swing is at. So that was what concerned me. And, I know Bellinger also, him and Andre Ethier both spoke about it. He was hitting at Ethier's house during the offseason and kind of getting input from him. And Ethier even said that, he is open to feedback. And I was able to, kind of share some pointers with him and stuff like that. But if I remember correctly, it was still in the same light of, hey, like, at the end of the day, it is Bellinger's swing. Like, he has to figure out what works for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the feel versus real is what stuck out to me because of what Bellinger had said.
Yeah, and I think it's fair when you're reading a quote in print versus seeing the guy say it. I mean, when I read from the hitting coach, if he wants to experiment, he's his own person. That to me, I'm projecting here. That feels like frustration. That feels like, look, I'm the hitting coach. You're looking at me like, why haven't you fixed this guy? And my response is, hey, he's his own person. We can sit here and we can try and help. And again, we talked about it all last year. It's all the different hitting stances. Like, the Dodgers have not done this with any other player. So to the idea that they would have a unique strategy just with Cody Bellinger where they're changing his stance and how open or how closed or how wide or how narrow or the angle. I mean, like, he's the only guy doing this. And it's sort of been a trajectory. Like, go back to the MVP season. Whatever your swing looked like then, let's replicate that. And I recognize you had shoulder surgery. It's different. But that's not an excuse now. We're a year removed from it, I just interviewed Pedro Mora last week and was reading his book. And it was talking about the stories of guys like Justin Turner who have gone to hitting coaches and saying, teach me. Like, I'm open to teaching. Now, there's more to it. Like, Justin Turner had a unique hand-eye coordination that allowed him to execute what he wanted to. But I don't know. Again, I'm not trying to overblow this or be inflammatory, but I read these quotes and they line up with what I'm seeing with my eyes, which is a guy who is experimenting, a guy who's in his own head, and maybe a guy who's not listening to the right things. Now, we know Bellinger in the last season of the last year of arbitration, he signed a $17 million contract with the Dodgers. We know the Dodgers just signed Freddie Freeman. Trey Turner is up for an extension at some point. Walker Buehler, Julio Urias, guys like that are coming down the pike as far as extensions. There's multiple ways we could go before we finish up this Bellinger conversation. I think one piece is, what do you think his 2022 season looks like? How long does he have? How long of a leash does he have to begin the season as the starting center fielder before they go another direction? And secondly, what do you think his long-term career looks like? So take whichever one of those you want. But I think Bellinger, I mean, a guy with an MVP in his back pocket, and yet a guy who could very realistically put together 2 incredibly below average offensive seasons right before he hits free agency.
I think they'll give him about a month, the first month of the regular season to, kind of figure it out. Because in fact, like I kind of argued last year, and I know you'll agree, like he does bring a ton of value defensively. Like there's no denying that. So if he's at least putting the ball in play and they can kind of see, there's progress on that front, like they'll be willing to stick with him. Now, if he's striking out at the same rate as he did in spring training and through some stretches of last year, then, maybe it's a little bit less than a month. But I think for the most part, they'll give him the first month of the regular season to kind of figure it out, if that's how you want to phrase it. After that, I think it could get a little dicey depending on where things are with the 40-man roster, because obviously, a lot of people, the way Kevin Pillar kind of played defensively, and he didn't necessarily hit particularly well during spring training
his offensive numbers are pretty much the same as Bellinger's. So for the folks that are on the Pillar train, yeah, he makes a couple diving catches, but I can assure you it's not pretty offensively.
Yeah. So, what may end up helping Bellinger's case is the 40-man roster outlook, right? And there isn't necessarily a clear replacement. Sure, maybe they just slide Chris Taylor over to center field and put Gavin Lux in left field. I know we'll get into some of that stuff later on. I think what's more interesting, though, is the long-term outlook, because a few years ago, there was the conversation of, hey, the Dodgers are going to be in a situation where Corey Seager, Cody Bellinger, Walker Buehler are all going to be up for free agency within the same sort of window. And the question to me was, what 2 of the 3 would you re-sign or, sign long-term? Because you're probably not going to keep all 3. And for me, it was Bellinger and Buehler. And now, I think in a couple of years, we could end up in a situation where only Buehler is on the team.
Yeah. And Urias is actually up 1 year prior to I believe it's Bellinger the next year, and then Urias the year after that, and Buehler. But yeah, and honestly, I think when we had this conversation last, I was out on Bellinger, because what's so interesting is, like, a guy like Corey Seager, for example, the issue was health, but as far as when he was healthy, there was a level of consistency that you saw. I mean, I just said it. Bellinger's, like, from 2019 to 2020, his batting average dropped 70 points and then dropped another 70 points after that. And the year before, the breakout year, it was 40 points low. I mean, like, so it wasn't like a guy who's hitting between 260 and 280 every year. It's a guy who's at 260, then 300, then 240, then 160. Like, it's all over the place. And so you can't deny the MVP season, but it's not a guy who has put together a 3 to 4 year stretch of MVP level play. He went from a very good player, like a all-star level player, to an MVP. Now, he might be an all-star level player, but if you're going to have to pay him a contract like Corey Seager got, which is an MVP level contract, I would be concerned about that. For me, I mean, I'll ask you straight up, like Trey Turner or Cody Bellinger, you have to choose a year from now. For me, this is the easiest question that I will be asked all day. It's Trey Turner every day and twice on Sunday. Are you in agreement on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that I'm somebody who, like I said, I've probably been on the more optimistic side with Cody Bellinger, but I mean, eventually, rubber sort of meets the road. And like you said, you can't commit a long-term contract to a player given his recent production.
Yeah.
The flip side is, maybe he doesn't end up getting that type of contract anyway, and you can it works out for both parties where you get him on a team-friendly deal, and then he kind of rebounds eventually, and it works, becomes a win-win for both parties.
Yeah, the good news is twofold. One is the Dodgers don't have to make a decision today. They get a full season in front of them. And secondly, we're going to talk about this in a little bit. Spring training numbers can be misleading, but I think we would both agree that as far as the offensive depth, there seems to be more depth offensively in the organization this year than there was last year. Now, we might have said the same thing at the beginning of last year, and then we saw Luke Raley and Zach Rex and those guys hit, and it wasn't pretty. But I think with the healthy Edwin Rios, some of the non-roster invitee minor league contract type guys, there's a little more optimism there. And so I think with Bellinger, you give him a month to figure it out. And if it doesn't work out, you've got Chris Taylor who could play a competent center field. I know they're trying to develop Gavin Lux into a guy that they can hope can play a competent center field. And you've got the DH, so there's some more roster flexibility with a guy like Edwin Rios back. And so I think the leash can be a little bit shorter on Bellinger. And who knows, maybe, we're not rooting for this, but maybe he hits rock bottom offensively and goes to Van Scoyoc and goes to Brent Brown and says, all right, I'm all ears. Like, I have realized that I can't do this on my own. What do I need to do? And maybe we get to that point before free agency to where he can turn it around a little bit. Because if he can put together even half of a season of hitting 270 with a weighted runs created plus, a 15 to 20% above average on top of the elite defense, then all of a sudden it's a different conversation. You're talking about a guy at a premium position with a high upside, etc. But you've just got to be able to find some stability there. So it sounds like both of us are not optimistic that the first month of the season is going to be good. I'm not necessarily optimistic that we're going to see the guy even that hits 240 and is an above average offensive player. I'll put you on the spot, Matt. Weighted runs created plus, again, 100 is league average. End of this season, would you guess higher or lower than 100 for Bellinger?
Oh man, I'll go lower, but it'll be slight. Like I could see him putting up, 95 to 98 type thing.
And look, if he does that, he's still an incredibly valuable player because of the defense. So there you go, Bellinger. Let's talk about the roster. Now we'll move on to the next segment. Dodgers, as we know, there's going to be extra 28-man rosters for the first month of the season, 4 weeks of the season, something like that. There was a ton of speculation. When there's 26-man rosters, you can only have 13 relievers. But there was some speculation of what would happen if they expanded it. They did expand it. They are allowed to take, as there are no limits on relief pitchers on the current roster. The Dodgers have essentially already announced that they will be carrying 16 relief pitchers, which leaves them with the 8 position players, a DH, and just 3 bench bats. So let's start on the offensive side because that seems to be the part that is the most sort of dialed in. You've got Will Smith at catcher. You've got Freddie Freeman, Max Muncy, Trey Turner, Justin Turner, Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, Chris Taylor. Those are presumably your 8 position players. And then the 4 bench players, one of whom will be the designated hitter, Gavin Lux, Edwin Rios, Hanser Alberto, and Austin Barnes. Anything there that seems to be pretty much set in stone. Is that fair to say, Matt?
Yeah, but it's going to be, I think, 16 pitchers total.
16 pitchers. I'm sorry. You're right. Relief pitchers is a typo there on the headline. Yeah,
we'll adjust the math. I mean, I think the surprise obviously was a little bit with Jake Lamb. I know he was putting together a pretty good spring. Sorry, I don't know if I'm going.
No, you're good. Go for it.
Tangent from your question. But he was reassigned to minor league camp as the first game of the Freeway Series was just starting. So that pretty much ended his bid to make the opening day roster. And as much as he was hitting well, it was an uphill battle anyway because as we've touched on multiple videos, the 40-man roster is full.
Yep.
The Dodgers would run the risk of having to lose somebody on waivers, and Jake Lamb, unfortunately. I think, honestly, what changed the calculus for Jake Lamb is Edwin Rios.
Yep.
And so because of him, Jake Lamb can go to the minors for now, and I think he's comfortable with that. He's said, he wants to he's seen what the Dodgers have done with other position players, Max Muncy, Justin Turner, Chris Taylor, and he thinks he can accomplish the same sort of things in terms of revitalizing his career. So I think he's on board with the bigger picture. He's not one of these minor league signings who is saying, hey, like, if I'm not on your opening day roster, I'm opting out by the first date I can, and then I'm gone. So that's that. I think now, kind of pivoting to Edwin Rios. Frankly, I was surprised by what we saw from him in spring training because, again, like we've talked about it during the offseason, he was coming off shoulder surgery last year. And a lot of players, Cody Bellinger, one of them, have talked about how, it takes sometimes like a full year to truly recover from that. And if you look at Edwin Rios, if you didn't know he had shoulder surgery, you would have never guessed the way he's hitting the ball, the way he's swinging. And so as spring training it's kind of been progressing, I've had to change my calculus a little bit. And I no longer see him going to AAA to get regular at bats and sort of work out the kinks because I think now he's hitting well enough to make the opening day roster. Dave Roberts said, it's not set in stone, but
Yeah.
it is certainly looking that way. And obviously, the trading AJ Pollock creates more opportunities for him, and that I think that more or less cemented his spot.
Yeah.
And then Hanser Alberto obviously was a lock because of he signed a major league contract. Austin Barnes obviously is a lock, and then I think Gavin Lux as well.
Yeah, you and I are 0 for 2 on our bold predictions. I had a bold prediction about David Price. Your bold prediction was Edwin Rios in AAA to start, and we're 0 for 2 on those fronts. But yeah, I mean, as much as people want to talk about Lamb, Rios has been better in every statistical category this spring, and is a guy that has less concerns, I would say. Like, Lamb has struggled at the major league level consistently. Rios has only struggled for part of last year and then immediately had shoulder surgery. Obviously, a cheaper contract than Lamb, I believe, who will make $1.5 million. But it's worth noting with Lamb, I mean, when a guy signs a minor league contract with a roster, with an invite to spring training, the Dodgers don't have to cut him in order to let him go. Like, they can send him down to the minor leagues. Now, I was texting a friend who used to work in baseball, because the one thing I don't know is, does every veteran like Jake Lamb have one of those opt-out clauses? I believe it was Jimmy Nelson was a guy who had one a year ago or 2 years ago where, and it wasn't opening day, but it was something like within 2 to 3 weeks of opening day, if I've not been called up, I have the ability to opt out of my contract. I don't know if that's the rule with veteran contracts or the exception with veteran contracts, but regardless, the Dodgers can move him to AAA, which is the contract he signed, and then wait a few weeks to see what happens. We talk about how they have to open the season with 16 pitchers. That leaves them 12 position players. I believe as soon as it goes down to 26, then they would have to add another offensive player to that group, because it would have to be 13 and 13. And so we know that as soon as May whatever hits, and maybe they've had some sort of agreement with a guy like Lamb that said, hey, 4 weeks from now, we have to add an offensive player. You're going to be that guy. We've just got to do some things on the 40-man, maybe Evan Phillips, maybe David Price, who knows. But somebody will be moved off of the 40-man roster to make room for it. But yeah, as you said, Hanser Alberto, major league contract. Austin Barnes, you need the backup catcher. Gavin Lux, as much as he has not looked great this spring, we knew he was going to be, he's probably the first in line for the most at-bats. Rios right behind him. So that sort of makes sense. And who knows? We didn't know the Dodgers were going to take 16 pitchers. They open up in Coors Field. They're coming off a shortened spring training. So it makes sense that they would sort of say, we're not going to need 5 pinch hitters the first week of the season. So let's just get as many pitchers as we can. Let's preserve some arms, get through that Coors Field series, and see what happens. So let's look at the 16 pitchers then. I'll go down this list really quick, because I would say there are 13 guys at this point that we know will be a part of that 16-man group. From a starting rotation perspective, we know who the 5 are. It's Buehler, Urias, Kershaw, Gonsolin, and Andrew Heaney. You can add Tyler Anderson to that group because he's pitched well and sure seems like he's going to make the roster as well. So that's 6 on the starting pitching side. On the bullpen side, Craig Kimbrel, Blake Treinen, Daniel Hudson, Brusdar Graterol, Alex Vesia, Phil Bickford, David Price. I would say those 7 are locks. Again, my bold prediction was Price wouldn't be there. He comes out his first inning and strikes out 2. I think he has 2 scoreless innings in the spring. So shout out to David Price turning back the time machine. We'll see how long that lasts. Let's say. Okay, so that's 13. So if we take away guys who have already been sent reassigned, that's a nicer way to put it, Darian Nunez, Andre Jackson, etc., that leaves us with 5 guys by my count who are competing for 3 spots. You've got Evan Phillips, Justin Brule, Victor Gonzalez, Garrett Clevenger, and Mitch White. Now, Phillips is the only of the 5 that would have to be on the major league roster. Otherwise, he would need to be designated for assignment. The other 4 can all be sent down to the minor leagues. I'll throw some numbers at you real quick. Evan Phillips has not been very good this spring. He was good last year for the Dodgers, 10 1/3 innings pitched, 3.48, 3.17 fielding independent pitching. Justin Brule has been good, 4 scoreless appearances this spring. Victor Gonzalez, 4 appearances, 1 earned run. Garrett Clevenger, not as good, 5 innings pitched, 4 earned. And then Mitch White, I believe, has just pitched 1 inning and allowed 1 earned run in that appearance. So we'll start with the 13, the 6 starters, the 7 relievers. Any of those 13 guys that you think are in jeopardy? And if not, how would you sort out those other 5?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And for me, the 3 from the final 5 it was relatively clear. I think we're looking at Brule, Phillips, and Gonzalez.
Okay.
Mitch White still has options. He's somebody who I think, he can pitch in the bullpen, but I feel like they might prefer him as a little bit more of the spot starter role that we saw him take on last year. And so, send him to AAA, let him make starts. Clevenger has struggled, and I think just even looking at last year, Brule was a little bit more effective than Clevenger was. So I would just give him the nod there. Phillips, obviously, the contract situation, and I think Victor Gonzalez is somebody that they trust and like. He just struggled last season. I know there were some belief that it was related to injuries. And, he lost Julio Urias this spring. He lost weight. He's pitched well. And so I think he's basically has earned his way back onto the roster. And so for me, I think the opening day roster is pretty clear at this point. Fine, there are the few questions that we just touched on in the bullpen, but it'll definitely be more interesting come May 2nd when they need to kind of pare it down.
Yeah, I always feel like I'm like, this has to be the opening day roster. And then there's always one or two surprises where some guy gets DFA'd or who knows. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Phillips, I think they will keep just because they can for now, and then sort of we'll see what happens. Yeah. I know I'm an Evan Phillips fan. Justin Lorberg, guy that we have on the show, he really likes Evan Phillips. You just look at the spin rate and the movement, and it's hard not to like it, and yet he's been bad this spring, so we'll see what happens when the light turns on, as I like to say. Justin Brule, you pointed out, was good at the end of last season. That makes perfect sense. Victor Gonzalez was good 2 years ago, was terrible last year, but has been good so far. So those are guys that it's like, when you have 3 extra spots, you make a a Gonzalez and a Brule, you put them on the roster and you see what happens. As you said, a month from now, when you have to take 3 of these guys off the roster, again, Phillips has no option. So if he struggles, he will be DFA'd and a 40-man roster spot will open up, presumably for potentially a Jake Lamb type to take that spot. So I think we're in agreement there. We've got our 28-man roster pretty much set in stone. So there you have it. We'll see. I mean, I always say, I am perpetually surprised when opening day rosters come out, but who knows? Maybe this year we won't be. All right, let's move along to the next segment. Let's talk spring reflections. A couple headlines here. Craig Kimbrel struggles. Edwin Rios, a guy we have talked about a little bit, is mashing. Let's start on the offensive side, and then we'll get to the Kimbrel piece of this. 3 guys that I noticed, and a couple who we've already talked about, who have been great so far this spring. Edwin Rios, 1.272 OPS, 3 home runs and 21 at-bats. Jake Lamb, who we've mentioned, 1.046 OPS, 2 home runs and 27 at-bats. So again, as good as you think Lamb has been, Rios' OPS is 250 points higher. He has 1 more home run in 6 less at-bats. And a guy that we did a video on a while ago that I thought to myself, why are we doing a video? Who is this guy? We're talking about Eddie Alvarez, 1.208 OPS with 3 home runs and 25 at-bats. You heard me right. He has a higher OPS and more home runs than everybody's favorite, Jake Lamb. He's a switch hitter. The other 2 guys are both lefties. So those 3 on the positive offensive side have been impressive to me. Eddie Alvarez, I mean, have you anything that jumped out to you about that guy?
Well, I guess his start, I didn't know much about him when they signed him, and so then to see him, swinging the bat well, I thought, this could be a legitimate bench player for the Dodgers. I think as spring training has gone on, his stats are a little bit more front loaded, as opposed to recent production. I think there's been a little bit of a curtail and some tailing off. So had he kept up that same pace, I think it's possible he would have ended up pushing for a spot on the opening day roster because of his versatility. He's a switch hitter, like you said. But I think he did he did fade a little bit as of late. But yeah, those 3. I know we can get into some guys now on the other side of the coin.
Yeah, talk about some guys that are struggling to you. I've got one that jumped out to me, but you've got another one I know of at least as well.
Yeah, so, Mookie was a little late to get into Cactus League games. Dave Roberts explained that some of it is just, kind of the buildup and the way the offseason went with the lockout and not knowing when things would sort of start. Then Mookie was also delayed because of a stomach bug, and so he was pushed back, I think, 2 days before he finally got into a Cactus League game. Hasn't looked great, and again,
that's the most polite way. His OPS is 118. His OPS, he is hitting 059. He's 1 for 17 with no walks and 5 strikeouts. So you put it nicely.
Yeah. So again, like with the other spring training stats we've discussed, it's not so much that we need to see somebody hit the 300 with 5 home runs and all that, but it's the at bats. He has made solid contact a couple times, but similar to the, obviously still on a smaller scale, but similar to the Bellinger situation, it's the strikeouts and kind of swinging through pitches, maybe not picking up the ball. That's a little bit of reason for concern. And I think it's magnified, at least for me, because of the lineup implications. And obviously, I've gone on record by saying I think Trey Turner should be who's in the leadoff spot, but we've seen with Mookie, he's not comfortable for the Dodgers when he's been moved out of that. And so now if you have him batting leadoff, but if he is struggling, then it's going to just kind of throw everything off course.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my concern there. And really, I think, and we're going to get into a mailbag question that kind of alluded to this. the Dodgers kind of play and quality at bats overall has been a little surprising to me because it's not what we typically see from this team.
Yeah.
Where they're putting together good at bats and maybe it just ends with I hit the ball hard, but they were in a shift and so it was right at somebody.
Yeah.
We haven't really seen that, and Dave Roberts did sort of allude to it heading into their off day last week that obviously the regular season is fast approaching. Like he said, I want to see more, and then they came out against the Giants and kind of laid a clunker, and then against the Angels they didn't really fare much better. So we'll see. It could be even though spring training was shortened, it could be that these guys are just ready for the regular season to start, but that was surprising to me because you don't usually see that.
Yeah, I think the first game against the Angels, they had something like 4 hits, and I think 2 of them were Chris Taylor's and 2 of them were Gavin Lux's, and everybody else was 0 for, and the team had like 100 strikeouts. So, yeah, I mean, again, it seems strange to me that they would just be able to flip a switch on Friday, but for whatever reason, that's just typically what happens, is spring training just does not matter. One other guy that's worth mentioning, another guy we'll get into a little bit more in the mailbag, but Gavin Lux. I mean, there's all this talk about him sliding into the starting lineup. His line doesn't look all that different from a guy like Cody Bellinger's. 21 at-bats, 4 hits. That's the same amount of hits that Bellinger's had. Bellinger had more at-bats. The difference is Lux has struck out 7 times, not 18. He's hitting 190. He has walked 4 times, so the on-base percentage is up around 300. He does have 1 home run, so the slugging is 333. So he's walking. He's hitting he has at least 1 home run, so that helps the slugging percentage. But man, this is a guy that I keep believing in and keep wanting to believe in. Again, we don't have to touch on this now because we're going to get into Gavin Lux, but he's another guy that as far as spring training has gone, you'd like to be a little more confident. You'd like to see a little more from. So I'll save the Lux conversation because, again, for the mailbag. But let's go to the pitching side. Craig Kimbrel. Let me start with you and I have not talked about this. Daniel was the one who did the live reaction show with me. AJ Pollock for Craig Kimbrel. Before we get into his spring performance thus far, any big thoughts that you have? I mean, you kind of have had the opportunity to reflect after a couple of days. I know you were an AJ Pollock fan, but where do you stand on Pollock for Kimbrel?
Yeah. So my initial reaction, I wrote about it. We did a roundtable with some of our staff members, kind of analyzing and sharing thoughts on the trade, which is published to our website right now. So in there, I wrote, and I still do feel this way. Like initially, I thought, this is kind of a push.
Yeah.
After thinking about it a little bit more, I think the trade makes the Dodgers slightly better, but only because it answers the closer role.
Yep.
And frees up Blake Treinen to really stay in kind of the fireman. I need you in the 6th inning tonight and in the 8th inning tomorrow night, whatever the case may be. And that's important because if not, Treinen and Hudson, like we had discussed, were probably going to be the 2 primary closers. And if that was the case, then it was going to require Gratterall, Vesia, Bickford, who probably isn't making the opening day roster because he had some arm soreness to begin spring training. It was going to require them to all kind of take a step forward. And, getting each one of those guys to do that is a bit of a gamble. And there's no guarantee, as we saw. The Dodgers had a bunch of lottery tickets on the bench last year, and none of them panned out. But I just don't know. I worry that losing, as much as we agree that AJ Pollock was kind of a pretty big trade candidate throughout the offseason once, the lockout did end, my concern still stands that losing him already makes a left-handed heavy lineup even more so in that direction. And it's not like Cody Bellinger's tearing the cover off the ball. It's not like Gavin Lux is tearing the cover off the ball. And Lux is somebody, like you said, is going to get more at-bats. Fortunately, Rios is. I'm sure there's, then a contingency plan down the line if, they need to kind of adjust the bench. But I'm inclined to say it's a push. If it leans one way or the other, I think it makes the Dodgers marginally better.
Okay. Yeah, and obviously the caveat to all of what you said is, so I was pro the trade, exactly. I think they traded from a position of strength, which was their offense, in order to boost a sort of position of weakness, which you would say, just if you look at their pitching staff as a whole, that is more of a weakness. I'm not saying it's a weakness, it's more of a weakness. And again, I think the Dodgers just looked at the market and said the cost of starting pitching is so high that we're going to try and score a crap load of runs and have the best bullpen in baseball. If we can't get a solid 4th or 5th starter, then we'll make the other 2 areas of our team the best that we possibly can, which is what I think they do. Now, as Kimbrel comes in and struggles in his first appearance, the thing that I think is fair to point out is that you kind of knew what you were getting with AJ Pollock. Now, if you want to argue against that, you would say the injuries. This is a guy who basically misses 50 games a year at least. And so, Daniel and I talked, and he says, I don't like trading an everyday player for a guy who's only going to pitch 40 or 50 times in the bullpen. And I said, well, is A.J. Pollock an everyday player? He's missed 50 games on average, more than average. But you knew what Pollock was. Like, you knew what you were getting. The DH was going to help a guy like A.J. Pollock to stay a little bit healthier. With Kimbrel, it's been a little bit more of a roller coaster. 2019 and 2020 were not great. The beginning of this past season, 2020 and 2021 were not great. The beginning of 2019 and 2020 were not great. The beginning of 2021 was amazing. The second half of 2021 was not good. Got to get my years right there. And you could point to, hey, you know what? He wasn't the closer the back half of last year, which would have messed with him. Now he's going back into the ninth inning role where he's going to be more comfortable. I'm pro the trade. I think Kimbrel's better than Kenley Jansen. Statistically, that has borne itself out over the past few seasons, over last season, even with the struggles in the second half. But now we get to this spring. You're reading some of the stuff out of Chicago. He started spring in live batting practice, throwing about 90 to 91. His first appearance in Chicago, that ticked up to 93, 94, which is positive, but we're still well below kind of what we're expecting. I couldn't find velocity numbers from his first appearance with the Dodgers, maybe because the bat was hitting the ball every single time he threw. He has 2 appearances this spring. He has completed just 3 outs. He has an ERA of 72. He's allowed 2 home runs, 9 runs, 8 of which are earned. He has walked 2 and he has struck out 2. We just talked about how spring training sort of matters, but doesn't really matter. Where are you at on Craig Kimbrel? Are you worried?
Not too much. I think I guess my only concern would just be making sure that my concerns would be, is he healthy?
Yeah.
And will he be healthy come opening day? I think, his first appearance, his Dodgers debut, obviously left plenty to be desired, and it was unfortunate that it happened the way that it did.
Yeah.
Social media definitely was up in arms over that. But really, it was only his second time pitching this spring. And so he struggled because of rust, then fine. I think there's not much reason for concern. But like I said, if there's a health component to it, then I think we can kind of be worried about that.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's the case. I think maybe he just needed kind of a slower buildup, which we've seen with Walker Buehler on the starting side has kind of been like that in the past. But yeah, I mean, I think if we get 2 weeks into the regular season, it's still kind of the same thing, then we can maybe revisit the trade and say, was this actually a good idea, instead of, re-signing Kenley for the same salary as Kimbrel potentially. It would have been 2 years, I suppose, is the report that the Dodgers are offering, and then maybe you figure out kind of a trade partner for somebody after that.
Yeah.
But for now, I don't think there needs to be any reason to panic.
Yeah, I was trying to find velocity. I couldn't. But, here is the game log. Double, home run, single, strikeout, and then he's pulled from the game. And so, hey, you know what? It went out on high note. Three pitch strikeout of Archimedes Gamboa. So big strikeout there for Craig Kimbrel. Yeah, I mean, with veteran guys like a Mookie Betts, who's 1 for 17, those types of things, they get the benefit of the doubt in my mind. And a guy and Roberts has even said Kimbrel has only made 2 appearances this spring, so don't expect like a full workload from Craig Kimbrel the first few weeks of the season. And so something to watch there. But I'm not worried yet. I think the Dodgers can maximize a guy like Kimbrel. I think he gives them a look that is necessary. So before we move on from spring, are there any other pitchers that have caught your eye, either positive or negative? I mean, I know we talked about that things are kind of already decided. We know Evan Phillips has struggled this spring, which was an important spring for him. But any other, I mean, Kershaw has looked good. Any other guys that have jumped out to you?
I think Gratterall has pitched pretty well. David Price, it's been encouraging because it was obviously late to get into a game, but then he revealed, which I don't remember him discussing in the past, that every spring he deals with some elbow soreness just because it's like the intensity level, obviously, is different from the off season. So that was partly to blame for why it took so long for him to get into a game. But, if he can pitch well, either he becomes a trade chip for them and they get off the salary, or he just becomes a contributor, which, pitching, I think in general, the Dodgers are going to sort of need, and we're going to have to see how that sort of unfolds. Heaney kind of struggled.
Kind of.
he pitched better. He's done well when he was removed from the game and then re-entered. And so give him credit for that. He did say he's experimenting with different things, and so fine. But the starting rotation, I think the back end, we knew would be a little bit of a question mark. I think it's even more so than I thought heading into the season. But who knows? Maybe Price will be kind of the bridge to Dustin May in the second half or something. And I'm looking at the team. I initially believed Dustin May would be somebody who comes back as a relief pitcher, but the way things are sort of trending, they may need him as the fourth or fifth starter.
Yeah, and one name that we haven't mentioned, Caleb Ferguson, is a guy that is expected to start the season on the injured list. Tommy Kahnle has already been placed on the injured list. Ferguson is expected to be, I believe, placed there. They're not expecting to have him at the beginning of the season. Is that accurate?
That is, I'm not sure how they'll decide that. I mean, they could technically just option him to OKC.
Got it.
They could leave him behind at Camelback and let him go through kind of workouts there. But yeah, I mean, he won't be on the opening day roster yet. And so that kind of ties into what we were discussing earlier. Like the opening day roster is set. It looks interesting who they're going to take off come May 2nd.
Yeah.
And then you factor in that Ferguson and Tommy Kahnle may also be ready. And so it just gets even more complicated. But hey, I mean, I guess it's a good problem to have, right? When you have too many pitchers for spots available.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because that's a great point. When Kahnle and Ferguson are back, you've got Buehler, Urias, Kershaw, Gonsolin, Heaney, Anderson. Those guys are all getting paid a bunch of money. So there's 6. Kimbrel, Trinan, Hudson. There's 9 that are locked in. So then you got 2 more. So with Ferguson and Kahnle, that's 11. So now you've got 2 spots left. Gratterall, Vesia, Bickford, and Price. There you go.
And Price is arguably a lock as well.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they'll just DFA him and eat that salary.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that could mean Gratterall, Vesia, Bickford, somebody, 2 of those guys ending up somewhere they don't want to. One other guy that I want to mention real quick is Carson Fulmer. This is a guy, former high pick, huge prospect pedigree that has mightily struggled and been through a number of organizations. Only got to see him a couple times, but 3 innings, 1 hit, 3 strikeouts. So, a guy that will go to the minor leagues. Again, there's no real expectation on his end that he was definitely going to be an opening day guy. But we just talked about how deep the bullpen is. But that's a guy that I'm curious to see sort of what his trajectory looks like over the coming weeks. So, all right, let's close this thing out with a few questions. Thanks to everybody on Twitter that sent us those. You can send them to me at Jeff Spiegel, to Matt at mmoreno1015, or of course at DodgerBlue1958. We've got 3 questions here we picked, and one of them we've kind of been saving. This is from Eric Mers. Expectations on Gavin Lux's development this year with a loaded roster that may not guarantee an everyday spot. As we said, he's kind of, I would say, the first in line to be that 9th player in the starting lineup. Him and Chris Taylor give them enough flexibility that they can kind of, somebody could play third, somebody could play short, somebody could play second, left, center, that kind of a thing. Whereas Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts are pretty much going to be everyday in the field kind of guys. But expectations for Gavin Lux. We know this is a guy that formerly a top 5 prospect in all of baseball. Then he had the weird COVID year. He struggled in 2020, didn't really perform last year, has dealt with some injury stuff. So where are you at on Gavin Lux's development and what we might see this year from him?
I think, honestly, realistic expectation is just, maybe a productive role player, bench bat type thing. He's not, I know he's a former top prospect and he tore the cover off the ball and had a quick rise. I don't think we'll see him at that level yet. Some of it, like I've brought up in the past, part of me wonders is he's sort of hurt by the role the Dodgers have kind of morphed him into. First they moved him off his natural position, then they moved him into more of a utility player. He has openly said that he needs kind of everyday starts or at least regular starts because his swing is so predicated on a timing and rhythm component. I think he should get plenty of playing time early on. And, one thing that's interesting is throughout spring, Max Muncy not more times than not, but pretty often was the DH rather than playing the field. So part of me wonders, is that what the Dodgers are leaning towards to begin the season? Again, like with his elbow, as much as everybody has said, like it's fine. Are they going to try to kind of preserve him? And if that's the case, then that creates an opportunity at second base, probably for Gavin Lux. I think Chris Taylor will be primarily in the outfield. So that could help him because I think, honestly, the way the roster is kind of taken shape, Edwin Rios is probably going to be your regular DH. Maybe they'll play matchups if they're facing a lefty, but I think they may at least give him a shot to kind of prove that he can hit left-handers. So I don't think we need to expect Gavin Lux to hit, 300, 310, something like that. But if he's just productive, then I think you take that as a win. Yeah,
I mean, last season he plays 102 games, 380 plate appearances. He put up 1 win above replacement. So he is already an above average player. Now the weighted runs created plus is 91. So you're talking about that's where we think Bellinger might land if you're sort of That might even be optimistic. But, yeah, I mean, the thing to remember with Lux, first of all, he's 24 years old. Okay, so he's not going to turn 25 till the end of November. He has the greatest birthday in the history of the world alongside Justin Turner and Ross Stripling. Shout out to November 23rd. But the thing with Lux is he's 24 years old. And when you look at sort of the career path, again, I think I don't try and make excuses for guys, but he played in 23 games as a rookie in 2019. He hit 240, slugged 400, 305 on base percentage. That's pretty solid for a rookie with 2 home runs. He comes back in 2020. That's the COVID year. Everything's messed up. He has COVID to start the season. He's expected to be the starting second baseman. Everything goes sideways. He really struggles. He hit 175 that year, 246 on base, 349 slugging percentage. It was really bad. Last year, he comes back. No defined role because of how things are shaking out. We were hoping he'd get some everyday stuff. He had some ups and downs, but he hit 240. The slugging percentage wasn't where you want it to be. But again, an above average player. I'm actually really optimistic about Gavin Lux. I think before the end of his career, he's going to get to a place where he's a guy that's hitting 270, stroking line drives into the gaps. I wish I could remember where I saw it, but somebody's saying, hey, I still think this is a guy that's a 15 to 20 home run guy who's hitting doubles and playing all over the field. If you're doing that, that's an incredibly valuable player. I still have belief in Gavin Lux that he's going to get there. Now, is it going to be the first month of this season? We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised, though. I think if they really say, Gavin, we're going to give you every day at bats for the first month of the season. Because to me, Gavin Lux should have a longer leash than Cody Bellinger. Gavin Lux at least has not been given the run way in the same way that Cody Bellinger has been given. Give him an everyday role for the first month. And even if that's play left field, play second base, whatever. As long as he's in the lineup, let him get consistent at bats in a time when he's healthy. I'm optimistic about Gavin Lux. I'm not saying he's going to be an all-star this year, but I think he gives you enough and shows you enough to say that, hey, like I don't think he's going to play well enough where it's like, here's your shortstop of the future, Trey Turner, take a hike, thank you for coming. But I think he's going to play well enough to say this is a centerpiece. This is a guy moving forward. Maybe not on the Will Smith level, but a guy that's like, this is a piece of the puzzle moving forward. I think he can develop into a Chris Taylor type as far as comparative value for me. So that would be my expectation. Again, not right off the bat, but I think Lux this year, I'll say I think he hits 260, and if he gets consistent at bats, I think he hits 15 home runs and learns, and I'll say it, I think he learns to play a really competent left field, maybe even center field. I think he has the athleticism there. So if you combine all those things, I don't think any Dodger fan is going to be disappointed in Gavin Lux at the end of the season. My thoughts. Any reactions to that?
No, I agree with you, and I think it is just important to sort of reset the expectations. I mean, because if you're holding him to the standard of he was a former top prospect a few years ago, then it doesn't matter what because right. I don't see him hitting 330 this year. Yeah. So short of doing something like that, like you won't be happy. But if you understand, like you said, kind of the struggles he's had the past 2 years and just reset the expectations, if he's just productive for them, either off the bench, filling a utility role, whatever the case may be, it's definitely an upgrade over what we saw from the bench last year.
Yep, absolutely. And again, I think Dodgers are spoiled because we saw Corey Seager and Cody Bellinger, guys like that, come up and just mash right away. And for the reasons we've laid out, Gavin Lux did. All right, number 2 question. This is a good one. LA fan NorCal on Twitter said, do you think Dave Roberts guaranteeing a championship affects the players? What do you think, Matt?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the players themselves have the same expectations that Dave Roberts shared. And frankly, this one, for whatever reason, blew up more than in years past when he has said basically the same thing. Yeah. I think, if anything, you could argue that he was a little bit more I don't want to say bold, but emphatic about it. But it was marginal. The Dodgers do expect to win the World Series, and they should with this roster, totally. Right? I mean, if he came out and said, well, I think we're going to get to the NLCS this year, fans would be upset. They'd be up in arms saying, totally. Wait a minute, you just signed Freddie Freeman. You have a lineup full of all-stars, basically. So no, I don't think that had any impact. I mean, the players themselves, not that they expect it to happen from the sense that it's going to be given to them, but those are the expectations they have for themselves. They understand that there's still obviously a lot of work ahead of them, but that's their goal. I
think it was Chad Morama said if Roberts looked at this lineup and didn't believe that they should win the World Series, then he should be fired. And that was the appropriate. Again, people like to freak out like, I can't believe he said this. Like, do you think Justin Turner is going to be happy with anything other than a World Series? Do you think Clayton Kershaw is going to be happy? Walker Buehler? No, of course. All of these guys have one goal in mind. Many of them have already tasted it. And many of them, even the guys that didn't win with the Dodgers, have won elsewhere. And so Of course, this is the expectation. Of course, this is the plan. And so, no, to answer your question, I don't think this affects the players. If anything, it affects them in a positive way because he's saying out loud and sort of putting himself out in front and saying, yeah, this is the expectation. We're not going to accept anything less than this. And it gives the players a boost of confidence saying, hey, the coach is looking around the locker room and saying, we have what it takes. Let's go for it. So if anything, I would say it's a positive one.
All right. And frankly, it's nothing that he hadn't already said to the clubhouse.
Totally.
Like he wasn't going to take something like that to the media in a public interview without first having expressed that sentiment to the players.
It's a great point. All right, last question. We're going a little sideways on this one. NorCal Penguin. Just one question. Why does this team look unprepared? No motivation, can't hit, we're playing sloppy. I see other teams around baseball finding out their identity. I don't know what ours is. Arthur Kimes chimes in, and I think this was more of a joke, but he says, based on spring training results, will the Dodgers win 60 games this year? You kind of hinted at it. You haven't been impressed with the general approach of the Dodgers in spring training. Your response to NorCal Penguin on the Dodgers not knowing what their identity is.
I mean, I wouldn't say they don't know what their identity is. I will agree that their play, like I touched on earlier, has definitely been not up to the level that I would have expected from this team. A, with the veterans, and B, with the talent. Again, like you could say it is just spring training, and perhaps that is the case. But then, like, I just can't get over the other aspect of, well, it's a shortened spring training. Yeah. It's not like these guys have been out there for the normal length of time, and now here we are at the final week where things got a little bit sloppy. So more than I'm not really overly concerned. More than anything, I'm just surprised to see it from this type of team.
Well, and like it's funny because the vibe around the Dodgers has been in years past this sense of like we're going to turn this on once we get to the postseason, right? And last year it kind of came back to bite them a little bit because the Giants ended up being the best team in baseball and they came up a game short of winning the division, and it cost them. And Dave Roberts has even said since, like, hey, yeah, having to go play that one game against the Cardinals and then having to go 5 games against the Giants, like, by the time we got to the Braves, yeah, we weren't operating and firing on all cylinders. We know that Urias wasn't available, Scherzer wasn't available, etc. And so, while on one hand, look, it's a freaking 162-game season. There's less off days this year than there are normally. The shortened spring training. You don't want the Dodgers firing on all cylinders on April 1st, all right? On the flip side, there have been stretches where it feels like they just put it into cruise control, maybe a little bit too much. And I'm not going to freak out about this until it's the regular season. And if you and I are sitting here, 4 Mondays from now, and the Dodgers are, 6-12, and they're just sort of slumping through at Colorado and series like that, then maybe we say, hey, maybe we need to shift it up a year a little bit. But yeah, until this happens in the regular season, I'm not going to be worried about the approach. I'm not going to be worried about can they find their team identity. I'm not going to be, what I'm not worried about is motivation. I'm not worried about Mookie Betts and Justin Turner and Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler's ability to get these guys fired up to be motivated. Like, they have gone out and they have signed Freddie Freeman. They've traded for Craig Kimbrel. They have done everything possible to make this team the best. And look, by every metric imaginable, this is the best team in baseball. They are the favorites everywhere you look. And so for the Dodgers, no, Arthur, to answer your question, the Dodgers are not going to just win 60 games. Most projections have them like as the highest number ever, like 105 or something like that. I'm not sure they win 105. They have the talent to do it. So no, to answer it in short, I am not worried about the Dodgers. I'm not worried about their approach. I'm not worried about their identity. Talk to me on May 1st and we'll see how I'm feeling. Okay, Matt, I'm going to throw one more at you. It's a season preview. Something, this is our last full-length show that we'll do before the regular season begins. You want to give me a World Series prediction? You want to give me a total number of wins, division prediction? I'll throw a few. Actually, here, I'll throw a few questions at you. Okay. Give me the order you think the National League West finishes in. I'll help you out, and I'll put, I don't know, Arizona and Colorado, and you can figure it out. What order? Give me those 5 in order.
I'll do Dodgers.
First place or last place?
First place.
Okay, just checking.
Just to clarify for, I think, was it Arthur who was asking if they would win 60 games? Yeah, first place. And I don't remember what I predicted in terms of wins before the last time we did this, but I'm still thinking in the range of like 103 to 105 type thing. Second place in the division, I will say the Padres. I don't have a win total for them.
That's all right.
Giants after that, then Rockies, Diamondbacks.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to be honest. I haven't done a full deep dive scouting report on the Rockies and the Diamondbacks.
Chris Bryant was the difference.
Yeah, there you go. That's fair. I'll go with you there. Diamondbacks, Rockies. I think I've got the Dodgers winning it as well. What did you say for win total?
103 to 105.
Okay. So you're up above. Yeah, I think the Dodgers get to 101 wins. I think they win the division. I think the Padres are second. I think coaching completely failed them last year, and they have majorly upgraded. So I actually think the Padres are going to surprise some people. If you think coaching matters, like let's just say they went from a guy that might have been a zero in the coaching department to a guy that many people think is one of the better managers in the league. Look, I know people love the Giants, and I know what they did last year. It's the same thing on paper. I'm looking at it. The sum of the parts does not add up to me. Yeah. So I've got the Dodgers, the Padres, the Giants, the Rockies, and the Diamondbacks. World Series prediction?
I think the Dodgers get back.
Okay.
Let's see. American League. Let me run through the teams really quick in my head.
The Blue Jays are a popular team. People like the Blue Jays.
I'm inclined to lean that way, but I worry that are they too trendy of a pick that it's not going to happen. So for the sake of it finally taking place, let's do Dodgers-Yankees.
Okay, Dodgers-Yankees. This is, I'm looking at something the Sporting News put out. If you want a percentage chance to win the World Series, Dodgers 9.3%, Blue Jays 8.7%. Actually, third on this list, the Giants at 8.4%. Then they got the White Sox, the Rays, the Astros, the Braves, Mets, Cardinals, and all those teams are above 6% chance. I have no idea where their model gets this from, but there you go. So Dodgers Blue Jays is the favorite. That to me, that makes, I mean, the Blue Jays, like I was saying like how nasty the Dodgers lineup is and it's the best in baseball, which I think is all true. And then someone's like, have you seen the Blue Jays lineup? I'm like, you know what? It's fair. It's filthy. I would say, the infield is really, really good. They've got some guys over there that can hit. It's one of those things where it's kind of like until you see it all click and until you see them go and win and make the World Series, it's hard to imagine it. But you look, I mean, the Blue Jays and the White Sox are the two favorites coming out of the American League. And those are teams that we're not used to seeing in that position. The Red Sox, Yankees, they're down below 6% chance. So who knows? So I'm going to go with you. I've got Dodgers over Blue Jays. 5 games. I think the Dodgers win comfortably. That's my bold prediction. So let us know what you think below. Comments, give us your NL West predictions. Give us your win total predictions. I'm at 101. Matt's at 104. We'll split the difference. I'll give you 104. And then we've both got the Dodgers over the Blue Jays as our World Series pick. So let us know what you think in the comments below. As always, we appreciate you joining us. A couple of updates for you. We are going to have a bonus long-form show this week. Justin Lorber is going to be joining me, I believe, on Tuesday, and we'll be talking about Dodger prospects and how those guys have performed, guys who might be able to contribute. He's got his new prospect ranking list coming out, so that's going to be fun. And then we will be doing a live show on Friday night after opening day. TBD on exact time, whether it's going to be right after the game ends. But stay tuned for that. And that, for folks that are listening to this on the podcast format, our live post-game shows will be getting posted as a podcast as well. I'm not sure if it'll be the night of or if the next day, but stay tuned for that. The hope is to be doing a lot of those on Thursdays, but obviously the Dodgers don't play every Thursday. So if they're not playing on a Thursday, it will be on a Thursday or a Friday for the live show. And then Matt and I will be here with you every Monday, and those podcasts will get posted day of as well. So check us out on podcasts. We are on Spotify now. We're working on the Google platform, but if you're an Apple person, if you're a Spotify person, please search DodgerHeads, follow us. Please rate, please review. All of that stuff desperately helps us, so we appreciate it. If you're a YouTube person, subscribe, ring the notification bell. Tell your friends. You've got those friends that aren't as passionate as you are about Dodger baseball, who have been tuning everything out because of the lockout. They say, wake me up on opening day. You got to send those people. Send them this link. Tell them to subscribe. Tell them to join the conversation with us on Friday after opening day. We'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as Matt said, DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958 on social media. We have got you covered. Folks, this is a place you want to be for all your Dodgers coverage. That's Matt. My name's Jeff. We appreciate you. Opening day, just a few days away. We'll see you then.